Do we proceed to exist after the passing of the body? And if we do, what would that look like? I'm not proposing that I know the reply to this address, and I do not need to decry any devout convictions that offer assistance individuals come to terms with passing. That's not truly my sack. This video is going to be analyzing a few of the conceivable outcomes and attempting to figure out whether they're great or terrible. You pass on, and that's it, nothing. You terminate to exist. Passing is the changeless conclusion of encounter. Interminable nothingness. This is the most clear situation. Passing is the conclusion of life, so the thought that there is life after passing is clearly untrue. Our fear of passing is naturally modified into us, and to a degree it's unavoidable, but possibly reasoning can offer assistance us reason our way out of this circumstance. Is passing awful? Well, you might say that somebody biting the dust is terrible since they're not around any longer. That individual was there, and presently they're not, but I do not think this is really the key to the disagreeableness here. Let me hit you with this thought test. Let's say your best companion in the entirety world is this fellow George. George went through a long time examining astronomy, and he's around to go on an undertaking to the Andromeda world to inquire about there for the rest of his life. You can't take after him there, and once he clears out, there will be no way to communicate with him ever once more. That's a bit of a bummer, but presently let's say that instead of clearing out, the rocket George is taking detonates promptly after propelling, murdering him right away. The result is the same from your point of view. George is gone, and you'll never see him once more, but the circumstance where the rocket detonates unquestionably appears more regrettable, so the issue isn't fair that George isn't around any longer. There's something imperative, almost the truth, that George kicked the bucket. Affirm, so instead of considering approximately George, let's think almost about. Passing is awful since I won't exist any longer, and actually, I truly like existing. Existing is a beautiful epic. Is it terrible for me? In spite of the fact that, when I'm dead, I won't exist, so who would it be terrible for? It's simple to think that when we pass on, we enter into a kind of obscurity or void, and we put ourselves into it. It's as if we sink into this pit of nothingness, and we're caught there until the end of time. We conclude up in this unusual domain with no contemplations, no sensations, no encounter, and this is something that we some way or another witness for each endlessness, but this doesn't truly make sense. This is reifying nothingness. The comedian Norm Macdonald once said, "At that point, I came to a realization that you and passing will never meet. As long as you're here, passing is not. As long as passing is there, you are not. No doubt, but because you know it's coming. Goodness, but definitely, you do not need that." He got this thought from the Greek logician Epicurus, who had a comparable sight, so passing, the most alarming of ills, is nothing to us since so long as we exist, passing is not with us. But when passing comes, at that point, we do not exist. It does not concern either the living or the dead, since for the previous, it is not, and for the last mentioned, are no more. Affirm, but does it really have to be terrible for me for it to still be awful? Things can be awful in distinctive ways. Putting my hand on a hot stove is terrible since I'm encountering the torment and the terrible straightforwardly. Burning my hand is quickly and inherently awful. But let's consider a distinctive situation. Let's say I spend my evening looking over TikTok. The entire time I'm gently engaged. It's an impartial involvement, but what if my companions had too welcomed me out that night? I was looking over TikTok alone in my room instead of breaking a few cold ones with the boys, which would have been way more fun. That time I went through looking over wasn't inherently awful, but it was awful compared to what I seemed to have been doing. In Ad Dead, this illustration outlines the hardship account of why passing might be terrible. Not existing isn't awful in an inalienable way. but it's awful compared to all the fun, significant encounters I may have if I proceeded to exist. Affirm, but let's take this non-existing thing a small advance. What if I never existed in the first place? Would this be awful? Well, it seems terrible for me since I do exist presently, but this runs into a few major issues. Think about all the conceivable individuals that might exist. Let's see at our current era right now. Let's say there are around 5 billion individuals who might duplicate. Half men and half ladies. Each man might, in fact, make a modern individual with each lady, and past that, each single egg-sperm combination of each of those sets would too make a diverse individual. If a diverse sperm won the race, I wouldn't be the same individual I am now. I would be my kin. As a rough calculation, that's 2.5 billion ladies times 30 years of propagation times 12 eggs times 2.5 billion men times 50 years of propagation times a conservative 365 ejaculations per year times around 40 million sperm per ejaculation. That works out to this number, 15 with 32 zeros. And this is still only a modest division. All of those potential individuals may too have children with each other. This could go on for potential era after potential era. If the hardship account is genuine, you have to feel too bad for this boundless sum of individuals who never got the chance to exist. That seems like a bit too much passionate labor for me. Affirm, but we can just settle this by altering the hardship account a little bit. Instead of a hardship of life, it's a hardship of a life that actually existed at some point. This seems to have filled the gap I just jabbed in the contention, but there's still a problem. The area of time after your passing isn't the only area of time you do not exist. You also do not exist before you're born, but who truly cares about that? If you told me that I'm only going to live to age 50, I would be bummed out, and I would wish that I could live longer, but I do not wish that I was born 50 years prior. We seem to care more about existing in the future than existing in the past. So, to sum things up, non-existence after passing is a complicated issue. Actually, I'm thoughtful to the hardship account. I like existing a lot, but this is also the viewpoint of a fellow who exists. Which is certainly one-sided. I'll put nothingness in B-level positioning paradise. In a video like this, small, precarious religions portray a brilliant domain, as a rule, beautiful. Unclear approximately what it's really like, there it's depicted as this idealized, excellent place with no torment and enduring, where we can live in delight and adore God forever. But is this kind of eternality something we really need? The hardship account might say yes. Not existing is terrible since you'll miss all the fun. So, if we live until the end of time, that would be perfect. Well, not precisely. At a certain point, there might not really be anything curiously for presence to allow you. You wouldn't be denied of anything. Envision a classic thought of paradise. We all turn into blessed messengers and spend endlessness singing hymns together or something. Singing hymns is likely beautiful fun to do for a while, but doing that for all of endlessness seems a little over the top. What kind of life would be worth living until the end of time? This isn't fair. 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, or 1,000,000,000 years. This presence has no conclusion. There are a few things I adore doing: eating sheep vindaloo, fathoming intellect sweeper perplexes, tuning into Shoreline House, anything. But after the to begin with 100,000 years of doing that, it would likely get a bit stale. Affirm. Well, let's say you take a distinctive approach and you attempt to make the most of your time. You spend 1,000 years composing books, 1,000 years portray, you learn how to play each single instrument at a master level. You will continuously run out of things to do at some point. You will have done it all. You might be able to settle this issue with a few kind of amnesia framework. Let's say you get bored after almost 1,000 years of doing stuff. At this point, you begin to lose your recollections and disregard what you did a few hundred years back. By the time you're at 2 billion years, you may scarcely keep in mind what you went through your time doing as a youthful 100 million year ancient blessed messenger. At this point, you've changed totally. You have diverse tastes, a diverse identity, and you spend your time doing things that you wouldn't imagine doing some time recently. But is this truly worth it? There is progression between the youthful blessed messenger me and the ancient blessed messenger me, but is it still truly me? I do not indeed keep in mind the past me existing at all. My identity is completely diverse as well, and I'm likely hanging out with distinctive blessed messenger companions. I do not think I'd need something like this. All right. But possibly, instead of having to attempt to do curiously things or engage yourself, you fair encounter total rapture for endlessness, most extreme joy. This seems engaging at first, but it too reminds me of something. There was a consider where they connected anodes to a rat's brain that discharged and strongly burst of joy. They snared this up to a button that the rodent may press at whatever point it needed. As you might anticipate, the rodent fair sat there, squeezing the button over and over until it passed on. But I'm not a rodent. I'm a human, and it might sound presumptuous, but I by one means or another feel like I'm over that kind of thing. I'd likely truly appreciate the strong delight for the first few thousand years, but at that point, I'd start to think to myself, is this all there is? So, here's a paradise I think would really be alluring. You can hang out there as long as you need, but the entryway is open. Once you're fulfilled with all the things you've done, you can peace out. This situation seems pretty great. The issue is we do not really know which of these circumstances paradise would really be, and some of these cases are just completely made up to settle the boredom issue. I think the standard understanding of paradise is just that you live until the end of time in a perfect place. If that's the sort of paradise we're working with, I'm not a tremendous fan. Dante's Inferno, the first part of Dante's Divine Comedy, is likely the most popular delineation of hell. It has 9 circles filled with shocking disciplines like boiling in pools of blood or being submerged in solidified legs. Even Buddhism has different types of hells with complicated disciplines like the domain of the hungry ghosts. There are a lot of different portrayals of what hell would really be like, so I won't spend too much time on the details here. At least in the scriptural tradition, it's important to understand that hell is a very complicated issue. From what I gather, a lot of the colloquial understanding of hell comes from medieval art and literature and isn't really specifically based on anything the Bible says. Have you ever sat down and examined this thing? In fact, we're not permitted to go to the lavatory. Some individuals believe that when the Bible says eternal fire, it might not necessarily mean eternal torment. It might be that you had a soul, but it gets annihilated if you're a heathen. That would make this situation similar to nothingness. You do not experience enduring for endlessness, you're just denied entry into the hereafter. But for this video, I'll consider the most common interpretation of hell, some kind of interminable suffering. If that's hell, I do not think my situation here will be especially astounding. It's safe to say that enduring is terrible. It's like burning my hand on a hot stove, like I said prior. We have a quick, supreme abhorrence to the conscious involvement of enduring. It's a fundamentally negative state of being. Not only does enduring suck, but our punishment would, in reality, be interminable. When I talked about paradise, I came to the conclusion that eternality itself comes with drawbacks. Even if you're free to do anything you need or experience strong delight, here all the terrible things about endlessness are combined with a constant state of enduring. When it comes to phantoms, nebulous visions, ghosts, specters, spirits, and fiends, shockingly, something like 18% of Americans believe they've had an experience with a phantom. If you were a phantom, you would be condemned to exist in the domain of the living, no clipping through surfaces and seeing your loved ones going through their lives. Possibly, This is some kind of limbo state before you go to some afterlife, but for now, we'll just consider the apparition life. The only way you can communicate with individuals is with a Ouija board, which, by the way, is made by Hasbro, the same company that makes Monopoly and Connect 4. Your only line of communication to your relatives is through 13-year-olds trying to initiate a supernatural involvement at 3 a.m. I feel like that would get pretty disappointing. Possibly, you'd be condemned to frequent a specific area for some reason. Perhaps you were killed in a specific house, and now you have to spend forever moving things on the counter to freak out whoever happens to live in that house in the future. Possibly, some fellow is being too much of an eager capitalist on Christmas, and you need to visit him one night and show him dreams, instructing him about the mistakes of his ways and motivating him to care more for others during the holiday season. In any of these cases, I think this would be a pretty terrible presence. The stuff you're able to do would get really boring really quickly. It's not as terrible as hell with the whole interminable enduring thing, but I'll still put it in the same level. Now, it's time to talk about rebirth. Incarnation, more like the United States of America with their lack of walkable cities and dependence on the vehicle. Incarnation, resurrection, is when you die and then start a new life in a different body, rehashing the cycle of life and passing for endlessness. This thought is very ancient, and there are a lot of different takes on how precisely it might work. According to the Hindu tradition, we all have souls that get passed along through lifetimes, which clarifies how there's progression from one life to the next. In very early Hindu culture, there was an almost Christian understanding of an afterlife, with a paradise and a hell depending on how good of a person you are in life. You end up in one of those places, but some individuals thought that this was too black and white. People aren't either good or bad as a whole, it's a degree. Being good and being evil have levels to it. If you're a somewhat alright person, you'll end up in paradise with Mother Teresa and Mahatma Gandhi, but if you're a bit of a terrible fella, you'll end up in hell with Hitler. This doesn't really seem fair, but rebirth kind of fixes this. You end up resurrecting into a new presence, directly corresponding to how good you are. If you're a decent enough fellow, you'll get a better than average resurrection, but if you're truly min-maxing your karma, you'll get a pretty sweet rebirth. For the Buddhists, there isn't really anything concrete like a soul that's carrying over. Buddhism has the popular teaching of no self or anatta, which is the thought that nothing in the world has any kind of changeless substance to it, including our personhood. For the Buddhists, what we think is our self is composed of the 5 aggregates: form, the body, discernment, awareness, feeling, and creation. These structures are impermanent, but in the cycle of presence, that's what's being carried over into the next life. You can think of it kind of like the band King Crimson. Over the years, a lot of the individuals have left the band, and new ones have joined. After some years, none of the founding individuals were there any longer. It's all new individuals, but it's still King Crimson. This is what the intellect is like in Buddhism. There's no unmistakable core or character to it since it's continually changing over time. Another illustration is the ship of Theseus. Envision a ship. After a while, some of the sheets start getting a bit weak, so they are replaced with new ones, new screws, new sails. Eventually, every single component of the ship has been swapped out, but there's still coherence there. Eventually, through broad contemplation and consideration, you can achieve enlightenment, which liberates you from this cycle of life and passing, and you achieve nirvana. Some ancient Greek philosophers also believed in a kind of resurrection, but they called it metempsychosis, coming from meta, to alter, and empsychosis, putting a soul into. Pythagoras is likely the most celebrated fellow from this tradition that appeared to believe in it. There was an account about a puppy being beaten, and Pythagoras jumped in to stop it. He contended that when he listened to the canine crying, he recognized the soul of one of his companions. So, would rebirth be alluring? Well, for me, it kind of understands both the issues of nothingness and eternality. When you kick the bucket, your cognizant involvement doesn't terminate to exist, so there's no hardship of encounter into the future, and it also wouldn't precisely get boring. Each modern life presents you with a modern mode of encounter, and used companions, modern things to do. Possibly, in my next life, I'll be an orangutan running around, or possibly, I'll be a popular performer. Who knows? And if getting resurrected isn't truly your sack, you can just get edified and break from the cycle. This all seems lovely and great. A level, you kick the bucket and at that point promptly start the same life once more. Everything is precisely the same. You make all the same choices, you make all the same botches, you work the same work, you have the same companions, and you kick the bucket in the exact same way, just to do it all over once more for endlessness. Here we go once more. This is the celebrated philosophical thought of interminable return or interminable repeat. It started with the Stoics, who you might be common with from all the self-help stuff on the web, but it truly took off when Nietzsche brought it up. His first reference to it is a thought experiment in The Gay Science. It goes like this: one day a demon visits you and says, "Hello man, this life you're living right now, you're going to live this same life an unbounded sum of times, and there won't be anything modern. Would you despise this, or would you acknowledge it?" He expanded on this some more in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The fundamental character starts off lovely and panicked at the prospect of unceasing recurrence, but inevitably, they get over it and end up grasping it. Presently, it's curious to note that Nietzsche doesn't really come out and say that he accepts this is the case. He's not making any concrete supernatural claim. He's just tossing it out there as a plausibility. What this thought experiment is doing is more concerned with your response to that plausibility. If it startles you, you likely aren't living the kind of life you really need to live, but if you grasp it, you're likely on the right track. But what if this is really the case? When you pass on, everything resets back to when you were first born, and you go through all the same encounters once more. For me, by and by, this seems beautiful and great. At least so far, my life has been lovely and pleasant. I had a cheerful childhood, and my early grown-up life has been curious and fulfilling so far. Accepting everything goes according to arrange, and my life continues to be decently great on normal, I think I would be content living this life over and over once more for endlessness. I figure I passed Nietzsche's test. It might sound a little discouraging to know that this life is all there is, but each time I live my life, it feels like it's the first time, even if I've already had all these encounters in the exact same way an unbounded sum of times already. It still feels like the first time. All my encounters feel new and amused. But with that being said, I have a beautiful and blessed life to the point that I'm fundamentally as fortunate as you can get. I had great life RNG. I'm a white, straight man from Canada with sufficient cash to live comfortably. I do not confront any kind of abuse. I do not have any incessant torment. I have awesome companions and a loving family. But shockingly, a lot of individuals aren't so fortunate. If interminable repeat is genuine, everybody who has ever endured would have to live through that for endlessness. Everybody who kicked the bucket in starvation, everybody who kicked the bucket in a war would have to experience that over and over until the end of time. If we're amplifying this to non-human creatures as well, each single plant and cultivated bovine would have to live through that unpleasant presence for endlessness. Each occurrence of enduring gets amplified an interminable sum of times. The same is genuine of positive encounters. You will have your first kiss an unbounded sum of times, but the enduring makes it seem like that might not be 100% beneficial. If I was positioning this based exclusively on my own encounter, I would put this beautifully tall, but since of all the cognizant enduring, I'll compromise and stick it in B. The simulation contention is truly enormous among Silicon Valley folks imagining to be logicians, but the genuine reenactment contention was laid out by a veritable logician, Nick Bostrom. The contention goes like this. He lays out 3 conceivable scenarios. In situation 1, people and other civilizations like ours likely won't develop innovation far enough to make reenacted substances, or making reenacted substances is inconceivable in the first place. In the second situation, making mimicked substances is conceivable, but if a civilization makes one, it won't make a lot of them since it requires too much handling control, or there's some other kind of restriction. And finally, making reenacted substances is conceivable, and there's no constraint on how numerous get created. These recreations would be completely unclear from conventional reality. If we're in this situation, we're almost certainly living in a reenacted reality right now. The sheer number of recreated substances would dwarf real reality by so much that the likelihood that we're in genuine reality would be exceptionally near to zero. Presently, Bostrom's contention makes a lot of beautiful strong presumptions. The first one is that mental states do not depend on their physical instantiation. Our current cognizant encounter happens to develop from natural neural systems in our brain, but according to this view, this doesn't have to be the case. If we could make a silicon processor in a computer with the correct same neural network, the same cognizant encounter would emerge. Awareness is a matter of data handling. There's nothing more going on. This is known as substrate autonomy. To be clear, this is a beautiful disputable take. A lot of logicians of intellect accept that awareness isn't reducible to computation. Some accept that awareness does require a particular kind of substance for it to develop, like a brain. But for the purposes of this contention, we'll accept substrate freedom for awareness. Bostrom moreover spends some time in his paper laying out a few numbers, appearing how the recreation might be done. If it does conclusion up being conceivable, it will be truly difficult. But if we accept that innovation proceeds to advance and quicken, it doesn't truly matter how long it takes. Based on how much computing control it takes to reproduce a single piece of neural tissue, we would require a computer that may perform almost 10 to the 14 operations per moment to duplicate a human brain. Other gauges sit a bit higher at 1016 or 1017. We'd have to produce a few kind of environment for that brain as well, and this truly depends on how careful we are with natural recreation. At a least, we'd have to reproduce the conventional intelligent people might have with each other or their environment. We couldn't program each single subatomic molecule in the universe, so a part of stuff would have to be cleared out unrendered until a human came by to watch it. Based on all of this, along with a speculative computer plan that might perform 10 to the 42 operations per moment, Bostrom figures that civilizations in the removed future might without a doubt make recreations. There's nothing in rule anticipating this from being conceivable presently. For the record, I'm not actually sold on the recreation contention. I'm not beyond any doubt substrate freedom is genuine, and I too do not know that it's ensure that civilization will proceed creating until the end of time. With climate alter, asset consumption, and atomic war, it's completely conceivable that we'll conclusion up crushing ourselves. This might be thousands of a long time down the line, but we require a part of time to make a reenactment. This would moreover clarify why we haven't experienced any outsider civilizations. It seems be that civilizations tend to self-destruct, and indeed if we make it that distant and substrate freedom is genuine, our future relatives might not indeed need to make recreations in the to begin with put. Ought to we run a reenactment of all the enduring in the world if the creatures in there have cognizant encounter fare like us? If we made predecessor recreations of our entirety civilization, we would be reenacting starvations, wars, and diseases as well. But for our purposes here, my take doesn't truly matter. If we are in a reenactment right presently, what happens when we pass on? Perhaps it's like the scene of Rick and Morty where they play Roy. In this scene, Morty straps into a virtual reality diversion called Roy where he lives through the whole life of a man named Roy. He lives through childhood, goes to school, gets to be a football star, gets hitched, has a child, spends a long time working at a carpet store, is analyzed with cancer, beats the cancer, and at that point passes on in a mischance. He's at that point displayed with a diversion over screen and wakes up once more as Morty. He's clearly confounded since he fair went through 55 a long time living this virtual life as it were to realize that it was all a diversion. In a Reddit string around reenactment and passing, one priggish Redditor put it this way: we take our VR headset off and go, wow, that was so genuine, take a piss, and at that point put the VR headset back on prepared to play a modern character. This VR diversion plausibility is kind of comparative to resurrection. To begin with, look, you get to live through a whole life and at that point swap it out for an unused one when you're done. But it's not precisely the same since it's a solipsistic presence. None of the individuals you encounter in the recreation are genuine, they're fair parts of the recreation like NPCs in a video diversion. All the companions and associations you make are dreams. This kind of sucks. Perhaps it's like the network where we wake up and realize we're fair being collected for our vitality or something. At slightest, everybody in the recreation is still an instantiation of a genuine individual, so all the associations you make are sort of genuine. But I think this case is entirely terrible. At the level of extreme reality, you're fair being occupied with this fake world so that you can be oppressed. Well, possibly we're all fair a modest parcel of a few kind of super AI god. The AI needed to figure out how it was made, so it begun running recreations of human civilization and the lead up to mechanical peculiarity. When we pass on, we fair consolidate back into the AI god awareness, and at last, possibly it's fair the same as nothingness. Once our lifetime in the precursor reenactment is over, your awareness ceases to exist. None of these conceivable outcomes appear alluring to me, and each single one of them appears to lessen the esteem of our world, beautifully impressively. We would all fair be impersonations of individuals who, as far as anyone knows, existed sometime recently. The peculiarity happened. I'll put recreation in sea level. There's an ancient joke that goes something like this: the Dalai Lama strolls up to a hot canine stand and he says to the men running the stand, "Hello, make me one with everything." The thought that we're all one awareness has the implication of being a bit flower child dippy. It's regularly related with reflection hone or other methods that evidently uncover this truth, but this thought is really beautiful ancient. It's portion of the framework of rebirth in some schools of Hinduism where, profound down, we're all God or Krishna. It also risen a few times in the Western mental convention. Schopenhauer talked a parcel for case, and a few beautiful popular physicists have depicted comparable things, counting Erwin Schrödinger, Freeman Dyson, and indeed Einstein. Now and then, this thought is called open independence, which is a term coined by Daniel Kolak. There isn't truly much scholastic logic on the subject, but there are a number of books approximately it, and it truly has a lovely sizable community on the web. In this sea, there are fundamentally three ways you can see it: individual personality. To begin with, is closed independence. You begin existing when you're born, and you halt existing when you pass on. Everybody is an isolated spectator that exists minute to minute. This is how most individuals naturally think around it. Following, there's purge independence. Everybody has had the involvement of attempting to drop sleeping and all of a sudden a cringy memory from your adolescent a long time pops up. You're embarrassed, you're humiliated. What may you have conceivably been considering? It nearly appears as if somebody else had done it. But maybe it was somebody else, the you of the past. In each single minute, we're a distinctive individual. This is purge independence. In this sea, you're fair a small speck on the timeline of your life. Each minute you exist is a distinctive, interesting substance that's always changing. Over time, we are fair a minute of encounter. And at long last, there's open independence. You are each minute of encounter on everyone's timeline. The truth that some other substance is instantiating awareness makes them indistinguishable to you. This might appear a small wacky to begin with, but adhere with me here. Let's go back to closed independence for a moment. You're the same individual from birth to passing. But what's holding it all together? Perhaps it's memory. I keep in mind a few of the stuff I did when I was 10, a long time ancient. My memory of who I utilized to be is the coherence between all the minutes of my life. But this doesn't truly work. We do not keep in mind everything. That's not how memory works. I do not keep in mind what I had for breakfast on an used year's day of 2013. And there are moreover wrong recollections. Individuals can be persuaded of encounters that they never really had. So recollections out. Well, what around my body? I've had the same body since the time I was born. But once more, this doesn't truly work. The cells that make us up are always changing over time, like a transportive proposition. Same goes for the brain. So all of this kind of harms closed independence. We can't appear to point to anything that ties it all together. So ought we select for purge independence? Well, perhaps not. Indeed, though there doesn't appear to be anything tying it all together, it certainly appears like there's progression in our encounter. But how can we get over the oddness of open independence? Well, think about your cognizant encounter for a moment. From our viewpoint, there's essentially no crevices in our encounter. We're oblivious all the time when we rest, but there doesn't appear to be any transitionary nothingness in between. It's nearly an immediate alter from falling sleeping to waking up. When I got my shrewdness teeth expelled, I keep in mind snickering from the nitrous oxide as the specialist arranged the gear, and at that point in the following minute, I was sitting in the recuperation room. It was as if no time had passed. It was a consistent move. This progression keeps going from our to begin with encounters as children until the moment we kick the bucket. And imperatively, from our center of mindfulness, this square of encounter doesn't have a starting or conclusion. We fair kind of discover ourselves in the world as if we've continuously been here. Equitably, we weren't continuously here, but it feels like this mindfulness is a steady, since it's all we are. The as it were steady thing almost me is my quick cognizant encounter. It's the as it were thing I can truly point to and say, that's me, since my body, my recollections, and everything else is always changing. But here's the kicker, that quick cognizant encounter is the same thing that other individuals have the point to. What you call I is the same thing that I call I present. With all that being said, I'm not completely sold on open independence, but once more, let's fair roll with it. Let's say we are all the same individual, we're an indistinguishable subject of encounter. But we're fair distinctive parts of it. So what does this say almost passing? Well, one recommendation might be that when we pass on, the figment closes. As MC Ride once said, my involvement is a transitory pass of reason, our distinguishing proof with ourselves as one specific human stops, and we return to the sea of being. But what would this be like? Would we encounter all cognizant encounters that all creatures are having at the same time, nearly like you're sitting in front of a bunch of screens observing each single involvement play out? This is a beautiful dubious thing to wrap your head around, and it's vague whether this state of being would be positive, negative, or unbiased. But you might moreover consider the truth that right presently, you're as it were one instantiation of awareness, possibly in step of returning to a few default where you're everything at once. You cycle through each occasion of awareness. This picture might see something like the brief story The Egg by Andrew Weir. In this story, the primary character, you, kick the bucket in a car crash. You meet God who clarifies that you've as of now resurrected loads of times. Sometime recently, in your following incarnation, you'll be a Chinese laborer young lady in 540 AD. In reality, you've really been resurrected as each single human being who has ever lived. You were Abraham Lincoln, Adolf Hitler, and Jesus. You were too each Holocaust casualty and each adherent of Jesus. This entirety handle is implied as a kind of test. Once you've lived each single human life, you ended up a god, fair like him. The universe was made so that you get it that each time you harmed somebody, you're truly fair harming yourself. Each time you do something great for somebody, you do it for yourself. This picture is a part like rebirth but with a few contrasts. To begin with, it appears to be human as it were. You won't come back as a mosquito or a lion. And furthermore, it doesn't appear to be tied to any kind of karma. You'll be cycling through each single human life, so the activities you take in your current life do not truly have any significant bearing on your another lives, aside from the reality that you involvement the other side of each interaction. This story moreover has a truly imperative moral suggestion that's kind of comparable to the Shroud of Obliviousness thought test by John Rawls. In vision you have no thought who you will be in society. You do not know your ethnicity, your sex, or your social status. Rawls contends that we ought to endeavor to structure society from this viewpoint. Our standards ought to not be based on our current life and all the circumstances we happen to discover ourselves in, but they ought to be based unbiasedly, as if we might conclusion up as anybody in society. The egg situation is a parcel like this since you're really everybody, so the teaching of, do to others anything you would like them to do to you, takes on an exceptionally strict meaning, since the others are moreover you presently. This is a precarious one to rank. I'm not truly beyond any doubt what to think around returning to the sea of being. It's difficult to say what precisely that would be like. But as for the human-to-human comprehensive resurrection thought, I think that's truly awesome. You would very actually get the full range of human involvement, each occasion of enduring, torment, delight, bliss, and adore. I think that's effectively the most curiously possible circumstance. So here's the last list. This video is not a thorough account of each conceivable circumstance that might happen when we pass on. I moreover do not truly care to make the case for any of them being more conceivable than any other. At the conclusion of the day, we're all right now lively, so we truly do not know for beyond any doubt. If you got something out of this video, consider subscribing to my channel. Thank you for watching our video.